Hello, hello. It's a nice, partially cloudy day. We're in the car. It's nice and temperate for a summer day. And today we're going to be discussing yet again another one of Borges' short stories, his marvelous short stories, The Garden of Forking Paths. Now, this is one of his better known short stories. He has a lot of phenomenal short stories that are well known. This is definitely one of them in the top 10, I would say. This was the first time that I read this story, and it may well be my favorite, one of my favorites at least. It really is up there. It's an excellent story that masquerades as an espionage story, similar to Death and the Compass. There's a real espionage mystery-like feel to it, but it really comes full circle into and engages with other themes. And the book itself has a bit of a layering effect to it as well. And I'll go on to explain what I felt and what I thought about, what made me think of it as having that. So it starts off engaging with metafiction, like Borges loves to do. So it starts off with an excerpt of purportedly commentary on a book, which is The History of the World War. This is a real book. I'm not exactly sure whether the lines between fiction and reality, I'm sure they're being kind of blurred with Borges, but he says on page 242 of The History of World War, Lyndall Hart tells us that an Allied offensive against the Serre Montauban line, to be mounted by 13 British divisions backed by 1,400 artillery pieces, had been planned for July 24th, 1916, but had been put off until the morning of the 29th. Torrential rains, notes Captain Little Hart, were the cause of that delay. A delay that entailed no great consequences as it turns out. The statement which follows, dictated, reread, and signed by Dr. Yu Tsun, former professor of English in the Hochschule at Tsingtao, throws unexpected light on the case. The two first pages of the statement are missing. So that's the first paragraph of this short story. Then it goes into this statement of Dr. Yu Tsun. Now, Yu Tsun is a spy. He is a Chinese spy working for the Germans during World War I. And his narrative starts with the fact that his espionage ring, his spy ring, has been infiltrated, has been compromised. It's been compromised by another spy or counterintelligence agent of Captain Richard Madden, and this is an Irish agent working for the British. And he realizes that it's been compromised because when he gets a phone call, and he recognizes that it was the voice of this Richard Madden who was speaking to him. So there is a sense that Yu Tsun is in trouble. He's going to be pursued. The spy ring has been compromised, and Dr. Madden is after him. Richard Madden is after him. However, Yu Tsun has important information. He knows exactly where the British have stationed much of their artillery. during the Somme offensive, and this is, I believe, yes, the Somme offensive in World War One. He knows where the British have stationed these. He knows the city in which most of this artillery has been placed, but he is struggling to figure out a way to communicate that to the Germans. So he's in England. This story is taking place in England, and he looks through a phone book, a telephone registry book, and he finds out a way to communicate this information. He finds the name of a man called Stephen Albert, and he realizes that this is the man who will help him communicate this information. Now, he makes his way to go to see this Stephen Albert. He lives in, I believe it's a countryside area of Great Britain, of England, and he makes his way, I believe it's, countryside area of Great Britain, Ash Grove, or at least the station Ash Grove, and he goes off to see Stephen Albert. Now, this Yu Tsun, his great-grandfather, you start to learn throughout the narrative that his great-grandfather was a kooky fella. Now, he devoted the last years of his life, I believe it's the last 13 or last 14 years of his life, to devising a novel as well as creating a labyrinth. And he seemed to be a bit he was a bit kooky in that. People thought he was a little bit mad in what he was doing. Now, the novel, it was the last 13 years of his life. Now, the novel doesn't make any sense that this great-grandfather created. It makes no sense. There could be the first chapter, the main character dies. In the second chapter, the main character is doing another action. In the third chapter, there might be no main character, there's another character. It's kind of all over the place. There isn't really a cohesive linear narrative in this story. And no one has ever found the labyrinth. But is that really true? So, Tsun finds Albert's house. He makes it to Albert's house, and there Albert greets him. He greets him like someone who almost already knows Tsun is coming, and he knows of Tsun. There's Chinese music that is being played in Albert's house. In his, it's described almost like a mansion. It's a very big estate. And it turns out that this Stephen Albert is actually a sinologist. Sinologist? Basically, Chinese studies are his big thing. And it turns out that this Stephen Albert is actually someone who is translating, piecing together, at least, this great grandfather of Tsun's work. He's piecing together his book. Now, that's a crazy coincidence. And Tsun he has a very negative opinion of the book. He deplores the book. He wishes it was destroyed. He laments that when his great-grandfather died, a monk preserved his books. He laments that. Now, whether he lamented that during this time of this narrative or after the narrative, as he was writing the narrative, will be a different question, and you'll see why. So, this Stephen Albert has been preserving and, in a sense, making this book restoring this book, in a sense, restoring his great-grandfather's, Tsun's great-grandfather's work. And Tsun comes to learn, as Albert tells him, that the labyrinth is actually the book itself. The book is a labyrinth itself. It's a maze, the garden of forking paths. And it's described as an incomplete but not false image of the universe, as conceived by Zhu Pen. This is the great-grandfather. Unlike Newton and Schopenhauer, your ancestor did not believe in uniform and absolute time. He believed in an infinite series of times, a growing, dizzying web of divergent, convergent, and parallel times. So these times that sort of fork and converge, diverge as well, go parallel to each other, some in which we don't exist, some in which only some of us exist, some in which we're enemies, some in which we're friends, is the way Stephen Albert describes it to Tsun. Now, this is a freaky coincidence for Tsun, as it happens to be, as it would be, that the one person that is preserving your great-grandfather's work is presented to you here. Now, it turns out that Tsun actually has to kill Albert, and he shoots him in the back. And he doesn't shoot him in the back because he's freaked out or anything by these coincidences, that he went through a psychotic break or anything like that because of this coincidence. He shoots Albert in the back because that was his mission. Because the town in which the village or city in which the British had their artillery station was called Albert. And soon knew that the Germans were going to be leafing through the papers to see any sign that they could find to indicate where the city was. And once they found that someone called Yu Tsun, who they recognized as one of their spies, would have killed someone by the last name of Albert, they would know that that would be the place in which they stationed their artillery. Now that concludes the story. But as far as it relates to themes, there's a layering effect of Garden of Forking Paths. First of all, we can never really get the full labyrinth. When it comes to a labyrinth, we can never really uncover it all. It's a bit different than a maze. A maze you can uncover, go through one direction and uncover it all, but a labyrinth is much more oppressive and pervasive. And you can't really get the entire picture of a labyrinth. And it's because of that, I believe, that the first 2 pages of this statement are missing. Borges makes that a note. He notes that that's the case. Garden of Forking Paths has a layering effect as well, in that as the labyrinth cannot be uncovered itself, it creates a sort of dizzying effect, an effect that in which this narrative itself, this story, the Garden of Forking Paths, is not complete. It's not a complete narrative. As I said, the first 2 pages are not written, they're lost. And it's also known that Zhu Pen's narrative is also incomplete, yet it is not a false narrative. And that perhaps makes us wonder in regards to our lives, as to the fact that they're never really ever going to be fully complete, perhaps. But that's just another tangent to go on. In regards to the Garden of Forking Paths, it's in many ways a metaphor for time And that's the secret that Borges presents in here. The word time is never mentioned in the actual story by Tzu Pen of Garden Forking Paths. Rather, clunky metaphors are used for that. That's because Tzu Pen saw a dizzying web of times. Now, there is another commentary on this story. This story has been known as one of the first, perhaps not the first, but certainly one of the earlier references to multiverse theory, multiple different dimensions, and all of that. And many people make commentary of that. There is another way to look at this story, I believe, that's a little bit more, perhaps not as technical in the mathematical or philosophical standpoint, but is perhaps a bit more literary and emotive. And there is an element of cosmic horror in that. This element of cosmic horror is the one that I'm going to sort of propose here. Now, where is this horror coming from? Now, there is a subtle, we'll say subtext, a racial subtext in many of Borges's works, in which race, ethnicity, and culture are quite important. Where people are from, their lineage, their blood. That is very important. And that is something that is mentioned by Borges in many of his works. Him being an early 20th, mid 20th century writer, he could not escape some of those, I guess you could call them atavisms, throwbacks to the 19th century, to colonialism, and this sort of understanding of identity and race. Identity is an important aspect of Borges' stories. Now, the identity of Yu Tsun, he is an Asian man, Chinese man. And he mentioned, and this is mentioned quite often. You get the impression that he does not care for the Germans. In fact, he says that. He does not care for the Germans. He considers them a barbarous group of people. But the reason that he is spying for them is he wanted to show that he himself, as an Asian, as a yellow man, as it's written in here, could do just as well as a European man in spying. So there is an element of trying to like racially demonstrate that you're able to also succeed, to break these barriers, these cultural barriers in some ways. However, the ironic and cosmic element of this horror is that he has to end up killing the one man that preserves a sense of his cultural and personal legacy, blood legacy, in that he kills the man that was preserving his great-grandfather's great work. So it's for this reason that it appears to me that when Tsun writes about disliking this work, this rambling work that makes no sense, it's not actually just because Tsun finds it to be no sense. Someone can dislike many things, find many things deplorable, but because something makes no sense is perhaps not the best reason to dislike something. And once he started to understand the sense of the Garden of Forking Paths, that it was a metaphor, that it sort of opened up his consciousness to different realities. And he came to the understanding that he was in the reality in which he would end this sort of the progression of his family or his great-grandfather's cultural work, his cultural legacy, that he would end that impacted him on a very cosmic level. It impacted him very existentially, in a way you could say, that he to prove that he could do these acts of espionage for the Germans, he ended up destroying his own cultural heritage in some way. And I know by cultural heritage, it may not be exactly that, this book, The Garden of Forking Paths, is incredibly Chinese or anything like that. But there are, it without a doubt, is presented as a different conception of time, unlike Schopenhauer or Leibniz, as Borges describes it, unlike Newton or Leibniz, I believe. Leibniz or Schopenhauer. It's a very much an Eastern conception, perhaps, of time that soon is having to terminate because of his role as a spy, because of his willingness to go the full measure as a spy. So I felt that was an interesting way to look at the story in another way. That there's an element of cultural self-destruction in that for Tsun that was almost unbearable. Anyways, that was Borges's Garden of Forking Paths. Excellent short story. As always, Borges keeps them coming. He never misses. But hope you guys enjoyed that. Take care.